Ever since the beginning, Chris Roberts has had some crazy ambitions for Star Citizen's economy. While the scale of the space grew over time, these ideas were pretty grand from the get-go, with factories sending missions to receive goods from players to sell to players. It's a lot in such a detailed environment, but after bringing Tony Zurovic on, Chris seemed to feel they had the means at the top to make it happen. But will it? This is the long story of the Star Citizen economic system, how we got here, and what the plan is. This is your June exclusive video available to supporters on all platforms. If you're not a supporter yet, consider joining and gain access to a new video every month. If you are a supporter, well, thank you for supporting my Tomato Talks. So as I said, the economy began as an idea in 2013. From the beginning, AI and players were meant to be competing for the same missions. These missions wouldn't be randomly generated in your contract manager though. These were necessities shared out by factories, cities, trade hubs, aid shelters, and more. The simulation has always been a model of supply and demand on a galactic scale. One that would be driven in part by players, but ultimately would be stabilized by AI, through a ratio of 9 AI to every 1 human player. This demand-driven economy would run similar to others we've seen from games like EVE. Organizations in-game would be tasked with creating and transferring items to other parts of the game as demand builds. These areas would require the various tons of materials needed to create those items. The demand for shipping the items, shipping the materials, finding those materials, selling the coordinates of those materials, and extracting the materials are all jobs that can be spawned from this one activity at this one factory. And then there are the protection requirements, considering the local area and relative pricing of the goods being shipped. When these requirements are sent out by the organization, they'll propagate at the speed of data running. Real-time data tracking has been said to not be possible in the game, so some areas would receive the job listings later than others, requiring players to pick where they'd like to work. The idea of these missions propagating through game spaces by pinging from various data hubs is something I'll go over later in this year when we start talking more about data running. This whole process is conceived to be possible for both AI and for players. Player-owned storage facilities, factories, and mining outposts should allow for us to take on these responsibilities ourselves, but it still isn't clear how the various segments of this activity, the material acquisition, protection, and shipping will be distributed. But we will likely learn more as beacons and player missions become an option. This whole economic model was already ambitious back in 2013, and it was clear the company needed somebody with a lot of drive to create something like this to take the lead. That's where Tony Zurovic comes in. In 2015, Tony was brought on as the director of the persistent universe, the overlord of the whole simulation, the one who would engineer the verse. He has been a part of Chris Roberts' teams in the past and has grown quite a bit in the industry on his own. He joined the project because he was looking for something to challenge him, and a fan base that would appreciate that challenge as much as he did. And while he appeared a few times here and there to mention the system he wanted to create and talk about how he wanted to handle this challenge, we wouldn't really see any actual progress until 2019. At CitizenCon 2019, Tony Zurovic and economy designer Jake Mealy took the stage to introduce us to the quantum simulation system. I don't know why it was named this, but Tony did say during the presentation that he considered it a quantum leap, so there's that. Now, the presentation wasn't flashy at first. We looked at the existing modular mission system, the current static economic nodes like retail stores, the probability volumes driven by NPC interactions, and the inherent problems that all of those things bring with them. While the modular mission system could create diversity, it had no context or meaning in the game that was meant to respond to what actually happened around you. If economic nodes can't detect outside influences, no form of financial or material imbalance can occur to drive said mission with context. And probability volumes can determine encounters, sure, but they also do not change based on outside influences, much like the mission system, and they require manual updating. These were some major roadblocks in getting a proper dynamic economy and mission system running in Star Citizen. But the team believed they had an answer in Quantum. Displayed on a map based off the ARC star map on the website, Quantum was the underlying system that connected all of those major components we discussed earlier, with the aim of eliminating those specific problems we brought up. We can easily see how the probability volumes, which affect our NPC interactions, and the economic nodes with their own supply and demand, live inside of this system. But the true problem solvers are quanta, which is the plural of quantum. Quanta, being a group of quantum, are the actual simulated AI that carry out the tasks that we can't in order to keep the economy running and the dynamic nature of the game true. These quanta were described as lightweight AI that could be easily simulated without things like animation, shaders, collision, and other things. They would have their own traits and affinities that defined their interests and drive to do specific jobs or commit crimes around the system. Over the course of this demo showcasing the concept of quanta, various triggers were added to continue the economic loop that they were interacting in. Resources would be the supply for refineries, which ship to factories that ultimately prepare goods to be sold in shops. This entire cycle is meant to play out for both quanta, or AI, and players to take part in between each stage and, if things work out, at some stages as well. As the economy chugs along, powered in large part by quanta and in small part by players, these triggers will send calculated requests for various goods, workers, and resources that provide the missions the game will run on. During this demonstration, all kinds of amazing signs of the simulation were shown. The details of how each quanta would go about its day, mining at one moon, transporting materials to another, and shopping in the city, versus the macro movements of prices in the market, drop-offs in demand, and spikes in supply. The whole thing was detailed, thorough, and understandable. I can remember how excited I was watching this, how I figured this could be its own game if they wanted it to be, and how I couldn't wait to see it happen in game. It's been more than 2 years, and there's still minimal sign. While I do still think we could get a system like this, I'm not yet convinced. In fact, this is the part of the game I'm currently least confident about. I do hope to see this come to fruition, but this video was definitely a hype piece at the time. And while we learned a lot during this presentation about the plans for this economic model in the game, they mostly remained plans, up until the next time we received a major update. In 2021, Tony Z appeared mysteriously from the deep reaches of development for another update. This one felt better put together, in my opinion. Much of it was diving deeper into those major elements we already looked at 2 years prior. Probability volumes were given more context, explaining the way they interact with one another as security and piracy fight to dominate the areas around space stations, and cargo haulers lie in the middle. Economic nodes were expanded upon, showing the markets continuously feeding into one another and shifting over time based on large events and long trends in the game. More light was shed on the quantum behavior, showing the demands we saw on a macro scale in the whole system during the original demonstration, repeating again on the micro scale on a per-planet basis when explorers and miners are involved. These ideas and more were sufficiently discussed, and I'll leave the whole video linked down below. But the real topic of the show was virtual AI. Virtual AI is the connective tissue between the feature-rich subsumption AI, which carry out animations, interact with real-world items and players, and go about their everyday life, and the quantum AI, which are simulating the world around us by interacting with many of the services usually only accessible by players. These virtual AI allow a criminal who's going about their everyday crime-filled life to take risks, affect their immediate environment, and show up on in-game simulated services like security systems or air traffic control when they land. The chances of this happening are not just up to probability either. These virtual AI have their own personality, skills, and traits, as we discussed briefly before. The AI that you might run into out at an asteroid belt taking out a cargo transport is going to be a very risky and violent person. The pirate that opts to take low-key contracts and lie low at the local space station is much more risk-averse. And as the virtual AI develop along their own paths, they may begin sending out their own missions or becoming a focal point of contact. These are the aspirations of the virtual AI system. For now though, we'll have to wait and see how it pans out in anticipation of the Bounty Hunter V2 gameplay coming either later this year or next year to showcase virtual AI for the first in-game example. If you'd like to learn more about that Bounty Hunter update, make sure to check out the public video I released alongside this supporter exclusive video in the same week. I'll make sure to link it down below. So where are we with this whole simulation now? Well, the initial implementation was meant to be added at the end of 2021. That did not happen. It was actually quietly passed over and really didn't see any mention until 3.17. In April of 2022, we finally saw the first implementation of quantum affected items. Well, saw is an overstatement. For the most part, it wasn't noticeable as the scale was small. There were no actual trade commodities involved, and nobody had any real reason to care. I have yet to have a chance to see if we can actually affect the prices in real time, but I also haven't seen anybody else prove as much at the time of this writing in June. This first edition was tracking of the refueling and repairing service costs. It also saw the environmental missions which spawned combat support missions begin to be driven by quantum. This is why you likely noticed a bunch of beacons starting to come up all the time during that update period. These additions weren't very exciting at the time, but neither was the first inventory system. I can see this system getting a bit more attention towards the latter half of this year as more engineers are hopefully finishing tasks surrounding server meshing and other key tech advancements. And with the cargo refactor also seeing more work this year, it may be the case that CIG really does need a functioning economy to support the new trade interests. I don't think they would respond to that by working on quantum, but it could be something that they already foresaw. Besides the virtual AI edition with Bounty Hunter V2 we are expecting soon, as well as some tasks on the progress tracker, most is quiet on the quantum front for now. And we likely won't be seeing any major updates on progress until Q4 of this year. But if we do hear something inside Star Citizen or otherwise, I'll be sure to have an update for you here or on my second YouTube channel, Space Tomato 2. This entire system, quantum, virtual AI, probability volumes, the simulation as a whole, it's very indicative of Star Citizen as a project. It's a massive cobble of brilliant ideas being constructed in a way everybody kind of hopes will work. It tends to be ambitious enough that there aren't many working models to use as a barometer. There's no knowing if any of this will actually work in the ways presented here, but this is the hope, and there are some smart people working on it. I believe as long as the development is consistently accelerating past 4.0 and Squadron 42 does its job, these systems will eventually come to fruition for the players. I'd like to thank you all for supporting these videos. It's a joy getting to continue making these more contextual videos for you, and if you're seeing this after the public release, consider joining the crew to get access to my monthly exclusive videos, chat rooms, and more. And if you ever want to ask a question or two, I'm live streaming on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday talking about and playing Star Citizen. So make sure to use that bell icon if you'd like to know when I'm going live. Thanks again for supporting these videos, and I'll catch you all in the next one.